As new technology has emerged, the gap between generations has grown wider. This has caused a shift in how young people think, with many of the values once taught slowly disappearing. Some young people now think they are better than others. A young cashier felt the same way, but her perspective changed dramatically when she met an elderly woman. What the old lady did was unexpected, surprising everyone who witnessed it. Dorothy is an elderly woman who values simplicity, independence, and self-reliance. She prefers a straightforward life, but things don't always go as planned. Her day started like any other. To save time and money, she liked to shop in bulk, believing that buying more at once meant fewer trips to the store. For Dorothy, it was just another typical day at the store. However, one encounter would change everything. She never used a motorized shopping cart or had groceries delivered. Dorothy handled everything herself. As she moved from shelf to shelf, she filled her cart with a variety of items, including cosmetics, packaged foods, and fresh produce. Dorothy's shopping was going smoothly. She had visited the supermarket many times before and had no trouble finding everything she needed, avoiding any confusion between what was necessary and what was not. Her trip to the market was a success despite the walking and decision-making involved. After completing her shopping, she proceeded to the cash counter to pay for her groceries and end her shopping session. Even the queue at the billing counter seemed to be moving quickly. As she slowly approached the front of the counter, she began unloading her items. The cashier, however, didn't look pleased and sighed, likely because it was the largest load she had dealt with that day. After scanning all the items with a somewhat indifferent expression, the cashier asked Dorothy how many carry bags she required for her purchases. Dorothy wasn't sure how many plastic bags she would need, so she began packing the items herself, trying to figure it out. As she did, the cashier started helping her but irritably remarked, "You should bring your own bags, as plastic is not safe for the environment." The old woman was startled by this comment. She had been shopping there for years and had never received such a comment before. She never expected any of the staff to treat her this way, so it was a bit of a surprise. Dorothy looked the cashier in the eyes, and aware that she had caught the older woman's attention, the cashier waited. With a very polite tone, Dorothy apologized and said, "We didn't have these green things in my earlier days." Instead of accepting the apology, the cashier rudely replied, "This is the problem for our generation now because your generation didn't care to save the environment for the future generations." The lady was surprised by this rudeness and decided she had had enough. Dorothy thought of teaching the cashier a lesson and responded, "Back in our days, we used to return the milk bottles and soda bottles to the shop, and the store would send them back to the plant where they would get cleaned, sterilized, and refilled. So we did recycling back then, but we didn't call it green." She continued telling the cashier, "Grocery stores used to bag our groceries in paper bags that we reused for various things. But too bad we didn't have this green thing back then." The look on the cashier's face was more surprising than Dorothy's speech itself. Dorothy continued her statement by sharing a fond memory. "Besides household garbage bags, we used brown paper bags as book covers for our school books. This was to ensure that public property, the books provided for our use by the school, was not defaced by our scribblings. Then we could personalize our books on the brown paper bags." As Dorothy explained this to the cashier, more people began to gather in the line. It was obvious that the cashier was more eager to attend to other customers than to listen to her. However, Dorothy's words seemed to resonate with some of the customers, and their conversation with the cashier became more engaging. Dorothy's points were reasonable and valid. She continued to share more about life in her days, expressing how simple yet effective it was in terms of reusing and recycling materials, even way back then. The crowd found her stories interesting, and it appeared that no one was in a hurry to leave. Dorothy kept explaining to the young cashier how much better the old days were and how they led healthier lives in certain ways. She said, "We walked upstairs because we didn't have escalators in every store and office building. We walked to the grocery store instead of climbing into a 300-horsepower machine every time we had to go 2 blocks. But you know what? You're right. We didn't have this green thing in our days." Dorothy was right. It's true that back then, people lived healthier and more active lives due to their way of life. People used to walk miles and climb stairs because they didn't have the technology we have today. The elderly woman continued, "We used to wash baby diapers because we didn't have the throwaway kind, and we washed our clothes by hand instead of using washing machines. We didn't rely on machines to do all our work." After taking a brief pause to catch her breath, she continued, "Back then, we used to dry our clothes on a line because we didn't have 220-volt energy-guzzling machines to do it for us. We didn't waste energy or electricity on that. But no, we didn't have the green thing back then." Dorothy was making some legitimate and logical points which attracted even more people. What had started as regular rhetoric at the market had now become an interesting discussion. She went on, television has become a part of the nuclear family over the years. When it first came out in the 50s, we had one TV or radio in the entire house, not one in every room like today. And the screen was the size of a handkerchief, not as big as the state of Montana. At one point, Dorothy realized she was holding up the crowd for too long, but when she saw the smiles on their faces, she knew they were interested in what she was saying. She had managed to charm her audience and was ready to make her speech even more engaging. With that, Dorothy decided to continue. Every time, there was a new point and topic to discuss. This time, she started with the kitchen, saying that in their day, they used to stir and blend things by hand instead of using electrical appliances. To make her point, she showed her flexible hand, and some of the customers laughed. Dorothy made it clear that today there are various electrical appliances to do the work that they used to do by hand, and this technology is making the younger generation weak and lazy. She continued, back then, we didn't fire up an engine and burn gasoline to cut the lawn. We used push mowers that ran on human power. It's true, today even our lawns are cleaned by power tools that make us less active. Dorothy also commented, we exercised by working, so we didn't need to go to a health club to run on treadmills that run on electricity. But you're right, we didn't have the green thing back then. In a way, this was a better way to stay fit since it didn't feel like typical exercise. She then spoke about how they used to take public transportation to get around instead of driving personal vehicles and how that helped the environment. Dorothy wasn't done with the topic of transportation, so she continued to explain how taking public transport helped reduce traffic and kept the city cleaner. Fewer vehicles on the road meant less damage to the environment. Back then, people took the streetcar or a bus, and kids rode their bikes to school or walked, instead of turning their moms into a 24-hour taxi service in the family's $45,000 SUV or van, which cost as much as the whole house did before the green thing, Dorothy explained. She then moved on to talk about smartphones, saying, we had one electrical outlet in a room, not an entire bank of sockets to power a dozen appliances. And we didn't need a computerized gadget to receive a signal beam from satellites 23,000 miles out in space just to find the nearest burger joint. This last comment made a few of the customers laugh again. The lady spoke about how they used to spend time with their families and talk to each other about their day, but now everyone is more interested in their phones. It seems that the phone has become an extension of a person's body. Nobody can go anywhere without bringing their phone. The conversation left the cashier speechless. The lady gathered her goods and made way for the next customer. The cashier was completely taken aback by what had just happened. Dorothy finished her speech, looked towards the cashier one last time, who stood there quietly astonished, and then left the shop without a backward glance. The cashier was filled with regret and shame over Dorothy's reaction to the plastic bag comment. She was used to having the last word and telling others how they should live. Now she found herself thinking about how Dorothy had lectured her so much. Dorothy left the store and made her way to the car. She felt relieved, yet also troubled by her thoughts about the younger generation. Feeling a bit tired after her big performance, she just wanted to rest. However, Dorothy was unaware that someone had recorded her speech. As she drove home, she had no idea what surprises were about to unfold. 2 days later, Dorothy made her internet debut. The video of Dorothy's speech was uploaded online as someone had recorded the incident. It quickly gained traction, going viral and crossing 2 million shares in no time. This showed that the customers weren't the only ones who appreciated the incident. There were many people who found the message meaningful. Dorothy's speech touched many hearts, reminding people of a simpler time when life caused less harm to the environment. Her words resonated with those concerned about the planet, inspiring them to take action against plastic waste. The speech had a powerful impact, changing how people view the environment and proving that the older generation cared deeply about protecting it. Dorothy's humble yet meaningful message also taught viewers to respect their elders, showing that they have valuable knowledge and experience. She became a mentor to many, standing out as a wise and cool grandma with extraordinary opinions.